Allô? Non. Voilà. Bonsoir. Good evening. I'm Judith Rose, Deputy Cultural Councillor and Deputy Director of Villa Albertine. Welcome to the second and final part of Art in the Age of AI, or, as the New York Times moderator called it yesterday, the most glamorous alternative to the Met Gala.
Bravo!
It was only half a joke, because we're honored by the presence of such great speakers. It does indeed feel like a red carpet event. Having said that, for those of you who were here yesterday, don't worry, today's introduction will be shorter. Yesterday, we discussed the use of AI as a tool for creation and representation for artists, cultural institutions, and beyond. I personally found the testimonies of our speakers, including that of the representative from OpenAI, particularly revealing. They invite us to consider AI neither as a replacement of the creator, of course not, nor as a simple tool, but more as a collaborator, one with which the artist can interact, by which they can be challenged, and from which they can draw inspiration and creativity. But we also want to acknowledge the broader implications of this technology and the challenges it presents for the creative world and society at large. In Hollywood last year, actors were very vocal about AI's threats to the job market and ended a nearly 4-month-long strike with a new agreement with producers. We're honored to welcome Linda Powell. Where's Linda? Hi, Linda. Executive Vice President of SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Union, to discuss the agreement that changed Hollywood. Copyright is another hot topic and central to what could be seen as the French take on AI, embracing innovation while also prioritizing the protection of intellectual property and artists' rights. Today's panel will allow us to compare the different considerations on this very important topic between France and the US. Finally, in a year with major elections in the US and in Europe, the risks associated with AI, elections, and democracy are central. We'll discuss disinformation with our speakers to close the event. Again, my sincere thanks go to the speakers joining us tonight. We're honored to host such talented American and French experts and academics. Finally, I'd like to thank the whole team at Villa Albertine who organized this event and our partner, SACD, for their support. I will now give the floor to Vincent Florent, our Director of Film, TV, and New Media. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you, Judith. We have indeed another rich program today, as we'll be discussing the implications of AI on the job market, copyright, and politics. As Judith said, in a moment we'll hear Linda Powell for her keynote on the agreement that changed Hollywood. Then we'll talk about copyright and intellectual property with Miriam Lord from the US Copyright Office and Alexandra Ben-Samoun from University Paris-Saclay and the French Government AI Commission. This will be moderated by Amy Adler from the NYU School of Law. And finally, we'll discuss about disinformation and propaganda with Asma Mhalla from École Polytechnique and Columbia University, Alexis Cruz, AI and election specialist, and James E. Katz from Boston University. But first, I'm happy to welcome and thank for his contribution to the program, tech and culture expert Laurent Gaveau for an introduction who would frame today's panel with keynote, Attention is All You Need. Laurent, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello to everybody who was there yesterday. I am doubly honored because I had the pleasure to do the introduction yesterday and I'm doing it again today. For today, I have chosen this title, Attention is All You Need, which is the title of a very important paper research published in 2017. A paper research which introduced the concept of the transformer. I won't deep dive into the details, but let me just say that this paper research, Attention is All You Need, is the moment where machine learning and deep learning evolve toward what we know today as generative AI and LLMs. And obviously I've chosen this title because retrospectively it sounds a little bit like maybe a warning or an invitation to take it quite literally and pay attention, because attention is something that we need in the current AI revolution that we are witnessing. Just a second, I need to put my fingerprint here. In order to do so, to pay attention, I think it's important to clarify some key concepts, especially the one that we hear every day on the news. And there is maybe one thing to frame today's conversation that is interesting to understand is what are we talking about when we are talking about artificial general intelligence or super intelligence, and what are we talking about when we are talking about generative AI or AI as we use it and see it developing those days. And I think it's quite interesting to understand that those are two different things. I have a slide here which materialize according to ChatGPT, super intelligence or artificial general intelligence. I will give you the exact definition of what it is. It's an AI system capable of comprehending, learning, and applying knowledge across any domain as a human being. And above it, superintelligence, which is a term coined more recently, denotes an AI system that eclipses human intelligence across all dimensions, ranging from creativity and social aptitude to emotional intelligence and overarching wisdom. So it's not difficult to understand that we are in the realm of science fiction, where we hear those definitions. But it's also important to acknowledge that this conversation is going on quite strongly, less strangely enough, if you ask me, by some of the experts in the field or actors of the field. Is superintelligence to be taken seriously? I absolutely don't know. This is a discussion for another day or for other brains, to be honest. What I do know, though, is that the AI as we know it, which is called in the research field weak AI, but which is nothing weak, as we've seen yesterday and as we all know, AI as we know it right now, is disruptive enough to pay attention, obviously, and that there are very pressing, tangible, concrete questions, challenges, opportunities, and possible threats to examine, and that the experts today will do. The first thing to realize maybe about those challenges is that AI is everywhere, absolutely everywhere, and I think one of the most pertinent and common analogy is the one that Andrew Ng, a famous researcher at Stanford, made a couple of years ago, maybe 7 years. I will read it to you. Just as electricity transformed almost everything 100 years ago, today I have a hard time thinking of an industry that AI will not transform in the next several years. Here is an illustration. Personally, in my own journey through technology, I was deeply influenced by one book by the American historian David Nee, who wrote in 1990, published in 1990, Electrifying America, which delves into the social meaning of the electricity in America between 1880 and 1920. For those who are here today, you know I'm very much into history, so I will continue along this path. We have to imagine that a century ago, electricity reshaped the world that our ancestors were living in. It turned night into day, it boosted productivity, it completely transformed industries. This book, very important book in my opinion, doesn't just talk about technological and industrial changes, but explores how these changes became a cultural phenomenon, reshaping the lives of Americans, influencing everything from work patterns to urbanization. Importantly for us today, Nee also discusses how electricity was celebrated in art and public representations, in many fairs and exhibitions, highlighting how it became a symbol of a new era that captured the imagination of artists, writers, and the general public. Here is an example, another interpretation of the fairy electricity by ChatGPT. It is Chicago for the art fair in 1993, where the city was nicknamed the City of Light. The White City, because it was turned into a spectacle of light, symbolizing the promises of an enlightened age. A critical point that resonates with today's conversation is that electrifying America was nothing natural or neutral in terms of process. It was meticulously shaped by economic, political, and technical factors, as well as ideological influences, and it garnered methodical support from different groups, including artists. And very importantly, artists, actually. As one of the thousands of examples of artists celebrating this technological revolution, this is a French example, Raoul Dufy. The name of the painting from 1937 is The Electric Fairy. It is now in the Museum of Modern Art in Paris. It was once the largest painting in the world, which gives you an idea of how important this celebration was. It was commissioned by the French distribution electricity company. And of course, you can't see, but you should go. It's a celebration of a triumphant technology and the hope that the hope for transformation that the technology inspires. And I think that's where our paths diverge. Unlike many past technological waves that were almost universally celebrated, the advent in AI is met with attention and sometimes, quite often, skepticism. That is very true in the cultural sector, probably because it seems the cultural sector is impacted first, and that in many ways they are leading the way for all of us. Many questions are in everyone's minds, and they will be discussed by the expert today, but one is, for example, is AI coming for my job? Maybe it's a question that Tom is asking himself. Is AI coming for my job? In any case, I don't know if AI is coming for our job, but it's certainly reshaping all of them, or many of them. According to McKinsey, there is an estimate that 70% of employees' work today stands to be automated by generative AI and other technologies. So it doesn't mean 70% of employees will be replaced by AI, but some of their work will benefit from it or be replaced by, I will leave experts to discuss it. Another topic that will be discussed today is, of course, misinformation and deepfake. Another deepfake to symbolize this crucial point. Attention is particularly needed in an electoral year, so you all have one election in mind, I'm sure, and the whole world has your election in mind. But it's important to note that 2024 is the election year for the world. And according to the Time, globally, more voters than ever in history will head to the polls, as at least 64 countries plus the European Union, representing a combined population of about 49% of the people in the world, are meant to hold national elections, the result of which, for many, will prove consequential for years to come. So disinformation, deepfake videos, images, and audio can be impressively realistic. The potential for harm here is vast, impacting everything from politics to obviously personal reputations. Maybe the last point that I wanted to touch upon today is the starting point, actually. It's about data. There is no artificial intelligence without data. That's kind of a mantra. There is no artificial intelligence without data. I want to remind that to ourselves every time we talk about the brilliance of artificial intelligence. It simply doesn't work without the fuel. This is how ChatGPT interprets the prompt, an image that captures the notion of cultural data treasure trove. So I don't want to personalize or humanize an AI system that I know very well is just statistical, but I can't help thinking that it's rejoicing. I think we can all agree that this is exactly what we think of cultural data. It's an extraordinary diverse resource upon which the current AI revolution is built and upon which the current value is built. Intellectual, artistic, and creative production is the bedrock of AI. There is no AI without it, like no car without fuel. Our experts today will discuss how copyright and artists joining forces to defend their right can ensure a fair retribution and control of the coming revolution. So again, you know I'm very fond of history, so to conclude those two introductions, I wanted to go back further in the time, even further back than yesterday and mid-20th century and the pioneers era, but to Prague in the 16th century, where in Jewish mythology, Rabbi Judah Lo ben Zahel created a new human-like being to protect Jews from pogroms. The name of this human-like was the golem, a very famous and foundational myth. It was made from clay or mud. It cannot speak, and more importantly, it cannot think independently, making it the slave of its creator, but in service of the good to protect the community. And like any good myth, the golem gives us some keys for today. It's a creative and technological masterpiece, almost an unimaginable achievement. It is built to protect the community. It is some sort of tech for good, as we say in the field. But of course, it's also a cautionary tale of bad programming and awful risk management, because ultimately the golem will go wild, murder us, and will have to be neutralized. And I don't mean this myth or this conclusion to be a tale for artificial general intelligence or robots trying to kill us all in the near future. I think it's a key and concepts, all concepts, to approach the tech revolution with optimism and with robust regulatory frameworks to manage their societal impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurent. I'm now calling Linda Powell, Executive Vice President of SAG-AFTRA, on the agreement that changed Hollywood.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me all right? Thank you so much for having me here in this beautiful venue. I want to thank the French Institute and Villa Albertine and everyone involved in this amazing symposium. It's a real pleasure to be speaking with all of you, and I feel like it's so important that we have these conversations, that we get together as artists, that we get together as people who care about artists, and that we get together as interested citizens to ensure that we center humanity in the conversations that we have about artificial intelligence. I'm an actor. I am Executive Vice President of SAG-AFTRA, which is the world's largest labor union for performers. We represent 160,000 individuals who we like to brag are the faces and voices that entertain and inform the world. And I'm here tonight. I want to share with you what my union has been doing to protect our members as AI starts to roll out across our industry. We are at such an incredibly pivotal moment as a society, as a world community. And on the one hand, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what artists are going to do with these incredibly powerful tools. I think that the worlds that are going to be created, we can only begin to imagine from this starting line. But on the other hand, there is a real threat to the members of my union, the people who make their living from their voices and from their images and from their likenesses. Last year, I was on the TV Theatrical Negotiating Committee. Our fight to secure contractual language that included essential AI protections led to a 118-day strike. Along with the Writers Guild, we were part of one of the most consequential labor actions ever undertaken in the entertainment industry. And I'm very excited to talk about the contract we achieved. I'm proud of the work that we did and that we continue to do to protect our members, but with your indulgence, I want to backtrack before I get there to about a year ago, when a strike wasn't even a twinkle in my eye. I was going into my fourth stint as a negotiator, thinking about the proposals we wanted to bring forward, wanted to start to prepare our strategy for the upcoming negotiations. I had never thought about artificial intelligence and how it might affect us. I had no idea how artificial intelligence might start to be used in my work. I had never been scanned. I had never thought about what it would mean to be scanned. And luckily, other people had been thinking about it. Our staff had been thinking about it. Our staff had been working on it for a couple of years, actually, watching the technology, thinking about the challenges we were going to be facing. So our staff came to our meetings armed with information about what was coming down the pike and with proposals to create guardrails for us. And quite honestly, when they laid it all out in front of me, it blew my mind. I had no idea. Imagine being told that there would soon exist a possibility to create a version of you that someone else would have the ability, a digital double is what our contract language eventually called it, that no one will be able to discern from the real you, that they will have the ability to put in a scene and have it say the things that they want it to say, have it feel the things that they want it to feel, and no one would know whether or not that was your performance or not. My first reaction was, this is crazy. Is this where we're going? Do I want to be an actor in this world? Because when I was a little girl watching TV and watching actors, I was drawn to people's personalities, people's individualities, to the feeling that they were expressing a piece of themselves that was so deep that it managed to reach through the screen and touch a deep piece of me. That's why I became an actor. I wanted to communicate. I wanted to connect. I started out in theater, where you have this connection between the audience and the actor that is so beautiful, that I feel is sacred in a way. So I'm sitting in this room and we're talking about scanning and would they be able to do this? Would they be able to do that? How are we going to put fences around it? You know, there are people in the room saying, well, let's not do anything. Let's not allow them to do anything. My mind was reeling. What is this new world going to be? Do I want to be a part of it? But in that room, in those days, I had to wrap my mind about it because it was coming. It wasn't just coming, it was actually here already. Members were telling us stories about, they scanned me last year for a film and no one told me it was going to happen. They brought me in, told me to go over there and stand there and get scanned. I don't know where that scan is. I don't know how it's being saved. I don't know, do I have any rights about what they might do with it later? Clearly, we had to do something. Our background actors especially were being scanned a lot, and that affects their livelihood if you start to create a whole group of scans that you can spread around in every scene, and we needed to protect their ability to make a living. So in those rooms in those days, I wrapped my mind around it because it was coming, and already there were high-profile members scanning themselves, making digital doubles of themselves so that they could copyright themselves and monetize themselves and license themselves. Stars are doing this. Stars are a little step ahead of it because they were like, I'm going to have my own scan that I'm in charge of, and you have to come to me to get my scan. There was scanning going on already for special effects, making superheroes fly. The technology existed. Our staff had seen where the technology was soon going to be even easier to use. Right now it's pretty expensive to use. We expect that it will get cheaper to use, and as it gets cheaper to use, our challenges will become bigger. So with the genie coming out of the bottle, the question wasn't what I wanted for myself going forward. It was, what do we do? How do we protect our existence? Our very existence in the medium of film and television. So I put myself, and we all put ourselves to the business of wrapping our heads around consent, around compensation, around digital doubles, about employment-based replicas versus independently created replicas, about postmortem rights, generative AI, data sets, intellectual property rights. It was a lot. We negotiated into the beginning of July, and then, I don't know, you may have heard a little bit about it, we called a strike. And we called a strike over a lot of issues. Our industry, it has been completely transformed by the streaming model, and achieving structural change in a negotiation is difficult, and we needed a lot of structural change. And like most workers today and throughout time, really, we face an uphill battle ensuring the protection of individuals over the agendas of corporations. So we struck. And we succeeded. We walked alongside the writers until they made a deal. We went back to the table late summer and stood our ground, this time not against the lawyers who we'd been in the room with the first part of the summer, who really didn't have the ability to say yes or no to the big changes we were asking for. When we came back to the table, Bob Iger came to the table. David Zaslav came to the table. We had the heads of the four major corporations in the room with me and Fran Drescher and Duncan Crabtree Ireland and the members of our committee, and we were able to explain to them our challenges, our fears, our needs, and they would say things to us like, well, we're never going to do that. You know, trust us, that's not our intent for this technology. Trust them. Even if I were to trust them, we're creating a contract that is going to be the contract for anyone who wants to come and work with us. So we need these guardrails. These are things that are no-brainers. These are things that, this is a line where we cannot go back to work until you solve this issue for us. And up until the very last hour of the very last day, AI was still on the table. Up until the very last hour of the very last day, there were, especially generative AI, there were issues about what they wanted to give up in terms of their ability to do something and what we were willing to live with for the next 2.5 years, because we go back to the table in every 3 years to try and figure out what's working, figure out what's not working. So we do have the ability to go back and revisit these terms, but for this moment there were places where we were not going to bend. And I could go on about the huge gains we made and the outsized increases to our minimums, to our health and pension plans, to our streaming residuals, which we were all very successful with, we're all very proud of, but I'm gonna stick to the agenda tonight. So I want to talk to you about what we achieved and that I'm so proud of us achieving in the area of protections around artificial intelligence. Consent. Consent. Our performers have to be informed 48 hours before a scan in detail what the scan will be used for. We're going to use it to de-age you. We're going to use it to make you fly. We're going to use it because we're going to need to redo a scene, and we don't have all the actors, so we're going to need to, fudge a little bit. The consent that you give is for that project only. when that movie or that episode of television is done filming, that's the end of the use of that digital replica. They are not able to use that digital replica again unless they come back to you and ask for further consent, at which point you can ask them for more money if you're going to consent to that. If you've passed on and they want to use a digital replica that still exists of you, they have to go to your estate, they have to go to your next of kin, they have to get consent from those people, and those people can also bargain for compensation. As long as they use that scan, your estate, your children, your relatives, your loved ones can benefit from the work that you put in to create that digital replica. If they cannot find a next of kin, then they come to the union, and the union will take care of bargaining on behalf of that. Compensation. If they use my digital replica for, say they want to replace some of the audio in a scene and they need to use the voice that they have because the audio was bad and they're going to spend, the money on the AI to recreate my voice or to make my voice say things, or they want to change some of the text, and I'm done with the movie now, I'm working on another film, they don't want to fly me back from wherever. If it had been a day of work, I will still get a day of work's pay because they are using my digital replica for that day of work. So we get compensated as if we were doing the work. If that work is used in the film, we get residuals as if we had done the work. Our attempt was to make it as expensive for them to use the digital replica as it is for them to use us. For background performers, they have the same right to consent to a scan. We have rules about background performers and how many background performers have to be a union on any given set. Like, I think for television, it's something like 25. And once you get to 25, you're allowed to hire non-union. They are not allowed to use a scan to fill the numbers. We will always continue to have 25 union members on set, and they can have the ability, beyond that, to use their AI to fill in the scene. We have larger caps for motion pictures. But we were able to get them to agree that the numbers of background members on any given set is not going to change because of the use of AI. What we didn't achieve, one of the things that, and you mentioned it before, generative AI, it's a big thing. Because their issue was, we don't know how we want to use it. We don't want to lose our competitive edge when there are going to be people outside of this agreement who are using it. And we are not willing at this moment in time to give up our future usages when we don't have a good idea of what we might be doing. What we were worried most about was, you own decades worth of intellectual property that includes our members in it, and we know that you are feeding it into whatever it is you're feeding, whatever big machine you're feeding your things into. Well, we can't separate the performances when we feed in the data. Sometimes we might use it to search for locations, or we need a history, or we want to look at costumes, so you're just ending up in there. We're not necessarily intending to use you, but we'll be in there. And they will have the ability to create what we called in the contract synthetic performers, which is a performer who is completely AI generated and bears no real relationship, no identifiable relationship to a member. You can't look at it and say, oh, they used Linda for that, or they used Bette Midler for that. They're new people. And our concern was new people starting to take over the roles that we are used to playing. We don't expect it to be happening to stars, but we can see it happening to background members. We can see it happening to the nurse who comes in the room and says one line. We can see it happening in all sorts of ways that they may say they don't intend to do, but we still needed some kind of safeguards around. And what we were able to achieve, we can't get separated from their data set, and frankly, I think we're probably already in there anyway, and I think once it's all in there, it's hard to take it apart. If they use a synthetic performer, if there is a movie or a TV show where a synthetic performer is used, we are to be told. And we are to be able to talk to them about compensating the union in some way for that synthetic performance. And if they use, I want, Paul Newman's eyes and Linda Powell's nose and so-and-so's lips, if they use your name when they put in the prompt to create something, you are to be given consent and compensation, and the ability to negotiate for compensation. The ability to negotiate is loose language. We did what we could on this, and we did not even get that much until the very last day. And I expect as we go through the next 2 years of this contract and we see how the technology progresses, there will be a moment where we come back and have another bite at that apple. At some point, you know how much leverage you have and you decide to move on. And we had gotten quite a bit, 14 new pages of contractual language that had never existed before is now in our contract. And our members have consent, and our members have compensation, and our members are wide awake about this now because we had the most gloriously democratic ratification campaign that involved lots of people who were very concerned with what we were giving away in their point of view, or concerned that we had given any license to artificial intelligence use, that we shouldn't allow it at all. It was a consensus of those of us on the negotiating committee that we would still be striking if we had said no artificial intelligence at all. This is happening. It's happening, and some of our members are ripe to take part in it. They are not worried at all about, they are excited about the possibilities that involved in like licensing their voice, licensing, their movement to, and then being able to like be somewhere else and do 2 jobs at once. Could happen. So saying no to technology in our experience has never been a viable position. The world is going to move. It's how we move with it. And then there were members who felt like it's fine to have the guardrails, but we didn't do enough. We want more on gender. We should have stayed and required more of this or more of that, required more security, we don't trust them. So how can we make the rules harder so that we can hold them to it? We had a very robust conversation around all of the rules during ratification, and then we ratify it by a healthy margin, like almost 80%, I think, or more. And now we're putting it into practice, and we're working on keeping an eye on them, keeping an eye on the technology is progressing, and trying to make sure that we are ready for whatever comes down the pike, and trying to make sure we start to see if we missed something that we need to go back and fix. Because, once the strike, that's 6 months of the contract gone, so we really only have 2.5 years to live with these rules and figure out what we might need to do next. And we also made sure that our members understood that contract language isn't the only thing that we're working on. We are very involved in pushing through some legislation that will be beneficial to our members and beneficial to individuals at large. On the national level, we have the No Fakes Act. We were in Washington last week testifying in front of Senate Judiciary Committee. The No Fakes Act stands for Nurture Originals, Foster Art, Keep Entertainment Safe. And it's got bipartisan support, and it will protect voice and visual likenesses of all individuals from unauthorized recreations from GAI, generative artificial intelligence. It will keep citizens from the production of digital replicas without consent, or publishing or distributing or transmitting an unauthorized digital replica. So someone's filming you right now in this room and tries to go use you to sell something somewhere, or worse, it will be illegal. That's what we're hoping to achieve, and that will probably be going to the next step. The draft legislation, I think, is about finished, and it'll move on in the next month. We're also supporting the Deep Fakes Act, which protects against digitally altered intimate images, which happens quite a bit to our members who are deep faked in pornographic content. And New York and California already have some legislation around that, but we want to make it national. There's the AI Labeling Act, which will explore the question of whether AI-generated content should be identifiable and noticed when it's being used. And the AI Foundational Model Transparency Act, which would direct the Federal Trade Commission to establish a standard for making public available information about the training data and algorithms used in artificial intelligence. We're very concerned that the biases that exist in society will be baked into the GAI models as they're created. During the negotiations, we were passing around a couple of different chat GPT things that were floating around, and one of them was, there was a man who asked for chat GPT to create an image of a black doctor treating white children. Couldn't do it. No matter how many times he prompted it, no matter how many times he changed the language, the model could not do it. They couldn't find the information in whatever had been fed to them to have a black doctor treating white children. It would be like a witch doctor, a kind of an African garb and little children. It would be all sorts of strange mixes. We all tried feeding different prompts into this machine, and it was impossible to get a black doctor treating white children. These are the biases that exist in the data sets because we're a society in progress, and we don't want to bake in our biases as we move forward with this. So we're very concerned with making sure that how the models, how the machines are fed is transparent to the people who are going to be part of this huge experiment we're all about to be part of. We also have some legislation here in New York. We have some members up in Albany today actually talking about a bill that will also disclose the use of synthetic media in advertising, and a bill that will forbid the film tax credits to be awarded if jobs are replaced with AI on that production. Our legislative staff are also working with international organizations, working globally to try and make some of this legislation match around the world, because we all know our content flies all over the place. And if the rules are one way over there and one way over here, at some point we're not really protected unless we can kind of get on the same page globally about what our expectations are. Trying to see if there's a way to bring a path to bring the different guardrails into alignment. That's our legislative front. We've also got advocacy. We're part of the Human Artistry Campaign. We're doing education to our members so that they understand our rights. We're doing education to the public to make sure that they understand our positions. And we're pushing for protections in every contract negotiation that comes up. We've done animation since we did our TV theatrical, and we got guardrails in animation about the use of those voices. We got guardrails in our sound recordings, which are recording artists, and those industries were easier to work with, easier to come to agreements with, because voices are so specific, and voices, it's so clear that voices are going to be on the front line of this AI change. It's already starting to happen, so they were ready with, this is how we plan to use it. Can you figure out a way to they know how they plan to use it, so we could all be on the same page when trying to negotiate around it. Our interactive media agreement has a strike authorization voted on. They haven't struck yet. That's our performers who work on games, video game performers who they do the voices that you hear, but they also work in a volume, which is this big green space where they do the movement that becomes the movement in the video games. And there's resistance to considering those movement performers as performers that need to be protected. So that's a sticking point right now, and we've been going quite a while with that negotiation and keep passing proposals across the table, but we're ready to strike on them if they are unwilling to protect those performers. We're trying to make sure that we can still make a living doing what we love to do, and we recognize that there will be some types of work that go away, but we want to protect as much as we can for as long as we can, frankly. We're going to stay loud, we're going to stay ready, and I just want to say that it's an incredibly exciting time and challenging time to be in leadership of this union. It's a turning point in our culture, I think, that all of us feel is happening right now, and I think it's important that we be participants in it and not passengers in it. And so I appreciate everybody being here and willing to discuss and willing to hear. And we need to make our voices known to the handful of people who are building and profiting off of this brave new world. I hope I haven't gone too much into the weeds. I want to thank you so much for listening. They told me there'd be time for questions and comments, so please, I'd love to hear what you think about what we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. We do have time for some questions, so please do raise your hand if you want a microphone.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for being here. This is an extraordinary moment in time, as you have laid out, as far as intellectual property and the just everything that we're dealing with AI. But my question, I have 3 questions basically. My first one is, on the process of scanning, is it healthy? Because I've never heard that word be used as far as an actual person being scanned. So I just have to ask my first question: is it healthy with a person?
Oh yeah, it's a type of photography. You go into a van and you're surrounded by cameras, and they kind of all swirl around you, and it creates data that they can then turn into a version of you. But it's I don't think there's any health issues to it. This is plastic. I'm not sure if that did any good, but I haven't heard anything in terms of health issues with it.
That's great. Now, my next question is, I have a few credits myself, so I want to ask, as far as the language of release forms and AI, has that changed? Because I remember on the set of, like, let's say, Law and Order.
In perpetuity? Is that what you're talking about?
When you're on the actual television show, or actually on the film set, and they ask you, you have to sign a release form. So has the dialogue of release forms and AI changed any since the agreement, or since AI has?
The consent form that you sign will have very specific, they have to be very specific about what they intend to do with the scan. So that's a different thing that's with this contract than with the contract from before. There were also, in some background casting agencies, were using a form that had in perpetuity, and we are working on getting in perpetuity should not exist anywhere. So we're finding that and taking it out wherever we can find it.
Thank you. And my last question is, just one more. Hypothetically, if we were doing a live scene right now in a film or in a television show, let's say Law and Order, and you were the lawyer pleading your case, and you wanted a certain reaction from the audience. If you had real people, that reaction could be more suspenseful and more exciting.
I like to believe, I see where you're going. I like to believe that this technology will only be used so much that it will become clear that human beings are better at being human beings than AI is at faking being human beings. I believe that's true. I believe that there will be a limit to how much this takes over. I think we like to be in community with each other, not with machines.
Thank you. There's another question right here.
Hi, thanks so much for that presentation. As you said early on, you're a union that covers some of the most recognizable faces in the world, but within your union, you're covering people all the way down to people who are barely just making it to get their benefits, and sometimes not even. How do you and your team kind of bridge that gap when you're negotiating, as well as looking forward that, you know, there could be a sense within the union that the rich are going to get richer and the poor are going to get poorer, if you understand what I mean, within the union? How are you thinking about it to kind of bridge that gap in between those two, if that's possible?
The way that we deal with that is not different because of AI. We always are negotiating the minimum. We're always negotiating the lowest you're able to pay a person for the job, and then the members can negotiate above that, but we are always working to set the minimum so that the rank and file, that the working class member has a shot at a living wage. We're actors, and there is, I think, given within our expectation, certain amounts of stretching the dollar between jobs, and as you well know. So that's a given. One of the frustrating things to us in negotiations when we were we were across the table from the CEOs was they kept saying, our talent budget is this, and we can't afford the amount you're asking because our talent budget is this. And we said, you are paying extremely large amounts of money to the number one and the number two on the call sheet. We are not here to talk to you about the number one and the number two on your call sheet. We're here to talk to you about the people down the line. We're here to talk to you about the people who are not negotiating their salaries, but who you are saying, scale plus 10%, take it or leave it. That's who we're here fighting for, because the scale has to go up in order for us to continue to be able to provide you with a workforce readily available to do the work that you want us to do.
Maybe one last question. I think we have one over there.
Thank you so much for a detailed conversation. This has been lovely.
Sure.
I run an organization that trains young women how to negotiate their salaries. And so I'm fascinated on your negotiation sides. For example, your legislative initiative where you're trying to make sure that the data sets don't have baked-in bias. How do you think through a negotiation when oftentimes the companies that are using these data sets are not the ones that are creating the large language models and pulling through the data sets, they're buying it from OpenAI or other areas. So I'm curious your negotiation thoughts around going into the legislation when oftentimes the people they're buying the data sets from don't know where the data is coming from or can't ensure the data isn't biased.
The negotiations that we do are with the producers, and there's actually only so much we can do about the data sets, and there's also only so much that it's worth using leverage on those data sets, because the producers that we negotiate with are a subset of all the people out there who will have the ability to use images that they find on YouTube, on Instagram, by pulling something off of the internet. All of us could exist in any data set right now that's being made and can be used to create entertainment somewhere. So that's where the legislation is not really negotiation so much as let's create laws. And we support the lawmakers. We have lobbyists who help make sure our point of view is in those rooms and the priorities that we have are in those rooms. As far as individuals getting in there to negotiate which pieces, our staff and our executive director and our government affairs and public policy people do have the ears of the legislatures, so we just do whatever we can to make sure that they understand the challenges that we're facing.
Thank you so much, Linda, for being with us tonight and sharing your vision. Thank you. Now we're going to move to the panel about copyright and intellectual property in the age of AI. And now calling to the floor Miriam Lord from the US Copyright Office, Alexandra Ben-Samoun from University Paris-Saclay, and Amy Adler from NYU School of Law. Thank you.
Okay, it's such a pleasure to be here. Generative AI raises a host of high-profile legal questions for artists and creators, and we are very lucky to have two of the leading experts in the world here with us tonight to tell us about these issues. And they are both on the absolute cutting edge of AI policy and copyright in their respective countries, in France and the US. So first, I'd like to introduce a little bit more about Alexandra Ben-Samoun, a professor of law at Paris-Saclay University, specializing in intellectual property law and digital law. She's an expert for various authorities, the French government, UNESCO, and others, on AI regulation, appointed as a qualified personality at the CSPLA, part of the French Ministry of Culture. She has carried out a number of assignments there, notably on the liability of technical intermediaries, artificial intelligence and culture, and text and data mining. In September 2023, she was appointed to the French Interministerial Committee on Artificial Intelligence with responsibility for culture and media. The report, AI, Our Ambition for France, was submitted to President Macron in March 2024. And next to me is Miriam Lord, the Associate Register of Copyrights and Director of Public Information and Education for the United States Copyright Office. She is an expert copyright attorney, one of 4 legal advisors to the Register of Copyrights, and this includes supporting the office's current AI and copyright initiative, which is very elaborate, and we'll hear a little bit about tonight. Before joining the office, Lord was the director of Global Intellectual Property Academy at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and provided domestic and international intellectual property capacity building and technical assistance for education policy and programs. She has also served as co-lead of the U.S. Department of Commerce's Equity Council's Gender Committee, and numerous other accomplishments, but I want to get to the substance. There are numerous complex questions swirling around copyright and AI right now. I'd like to break down our discussion into 2 main questions. Now, I should say, France and the United States have very different philosophies about intellectual property and copyright. Nonetheless, both governments are in their own ways confronting the same question. And the 2 questions, as I'd like to break it down, and we'll order our discussion around them, is first what we call a question of outputs. When an artist creates work using generative AI, does the artist own the copyright in the resulting work? How should we think about this, given that the model often makes so many what seem like creative choices in what the end product seems like, if you're using, for example, DALL-E or Midjourney? Does it matter how much or how little the artist prompts the model in determining whether the artist can own that output? The second question has to do with training. Can generative AI companies train their systems on works created by artists without getting permission? And if they do this, do artists and other creators have any rights against generative AI companies? The answers to both of these questions are unresolved and evolving as we speak, and I can't think of 2 better people to talk about them. And I'm going to begin with the first question. And I'd like to begin first with Miriam in this, with the outputs question. Miriam, I know your office is still studying this issue, but could you tell us a little bit about the U.S. Copyright Office's approach to the question of whether you can get copyright in a work that you create using generative AI?
Well, thank you so much, Amy, and thank you as well to Villa Albertine and all the organizers too, because this is such a rare opportunity for us to be here talking about these important issues with all of you. So thank you as well to all of you, and Amy, to you for moderating. So I just want to get into this and note that, like Amy mentioned, the Copyright Office in the United States has an unusual role. So we're part of the legislative branch of government, actually, and we advise Congress as well as other government agencies on copyright law and policy. So we also administer the U.S. copyright system, which includes registering claims to copyright. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Good. Great. So registration is not... Are they too close? We'll allow it. Okay, so in the United States, you don't need to register to have your copyright, but it confers many benefits. And so many commercially valuable works tend to be registered. So the office receives about 500,000 applications every year, covering millions of works. Under US law, under like the registration systems, in most other countries like France, the office is charged with examining registrations and determining whether the works are protectable for copyright. So the question is, if you're going to use artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence is really what we're focused on. Are you able to register a copyright or otherwise have protection? So we're looking at this, and early last year we launched this broad initiative to examine the copyright implications of the current forms of generative AI, and we issued some guidance. So some of these questions are up for debate, and some of them are a little bit more certain. And so a point of certainty we have is that we've issued some guidance to all of you to instruct you on how you should register your work if you have used generative AI. So we put that out last March. We instructed the applicants to disclaim protection for any content that was generated by artificial intelligence that was more than de minimis, and to briefly identify the human creativity involved. So since then, we've hosted lots of events to gather input from a lot of knowledgeable and interested parties that have been attended by thousands of people, like listening sessions and webinars to explain this guidance in a little bit more detail, to hear from all sorts of stakeholders from all different places, and leading out of that, all of the questions that rolled out of that became part of a regulatory filing called a notice of inquiry. And in the United States, what this means is it's when the government starts to look carefully into a topic of policy. So that was open for several months, and we received more than 10,000 comments from every state in the United States and from over 66 different countries, including France. And we've reviewed them all with human eyes at the Copyright Office as a part of our report that's forthcoming. I'll talk about that in a minute. But we got comments from authors and actors and artists and publishers and legal scholars and tech companies, sports leagues, a class of middle school students, and the bigger questions are the questions that we've raised today. So we've got the use of works to train AI models, which we'll get into, the copyrightability of materials, and then the outputs that imitate the identity of human artists, like we heard about before. So for copyrightability, some of the questions that we're looking at that lead into this has to do with where to draw the line between what is created by the human and what is created by the machine. So actually the first generative AI application that the Copyright Office received, remembering of course that the Copyright Office examines these, and so we're almost like a national laboratory for this. We can sort of parse these on a case-by-case basis because that's the nature of what the Copyright Office has always done. It's a test case. It was a copyright claim in a work of visual art that was claimed to have been created entirely by AI with no human involvement. So we refused registration on the ground that human authorship is required for copyright protection. And last August, the Federal District Court in DC issued a decision agreeing with us. The case is currently on appeal, but we're pretty confident. The other applications have less clear-cut sets of facts. So they have a mix of human and machine creations. So to date, we've issued over 200 registrations for works that contain AI-generated material when appropriate disclaimers were made. So it's not like nothing can make it through, but the guidance does need to be followed. There are 3 highly publicized cases where we've either narrowed the scope of registration or where our review board has affirmed denials of registration. I'll pause and then we'll finish up here and you can move on to Alessandra. But I just want to note that what you don't hear about the Copyright Office is when people get their way. When you get a registration, no one screams. You know, maybe they scream that they're happy. I oversee our public information education office where you can actually come into the office and we'll help you through an application or even in Spanish. And this, when you receive a registration, it doesn't make the news. You're not going to read about it anywhere. But when you don't and you really want it, you're going to be loud, and you can have a reconsideration, and then you can appeal it to our review board, and then you can go to a federal court, and that's what makes the news. That's what you hear about. So it is important for us to talk about the fact that the public record, which is one of the purposes of copyright registration in this country, is online and available to search and for you to do research on. So in terms of drawing the line, just to wrap it up, the ones you've heard about are a comic book created using images produced by generative AI. And we concluded that the copyright could cover the human applicant's contribution, which is the text, and then the selection, coordination, and arrangement of the text and images, but not the images themselves that had been generated. 2 other cases, it was less separable, with either the human altering the AI-generated content or vice versa. And the essential question in these scenarios, which are highly complex, is when and how can a human exert enough control over the expressive elements in the work generated by AI to constitute authorship? And in other words, when does AI become the tool that reflects the human's creativity rather than being the source itself of the expressive elements? So we continue to draw these lines on a case-by-case basis, and eventually the courts will weigh in as well. Thanks.
I'm sorry. Oh, does it work? Okay, fantastic. It's just on. Okay. I have to say I'm on the edge of my seat waiting for Alexandra's report because I'm currently writing about this question and waiting to find out what she and her colleagues decide. Okay, so I want to turn to you, Alexandra, and ask the same question. What is the French position about copyright ownership for works generated by AI?
Yeah, thank you very much, Amy, and thank you to the organizer of Villa Albertine, because it's a very, very great event. Today is a very great event. So in France, we don't have a registry or an authority like the US Copyright Office, which can make a sort of pre-decision on copyright attribution, copyright ownership. We don't have a court decision ever. On the topic of output, of the qualification of the output. So I think that there is only one decision in Europe, a little country, one decision, the first decision, not really very decisive, which is pretty much in line with American decision, in fact, the decision of a US Copyright Office and the decision of the court. So to be protected in France, a work must be original. This is the condition. The condition is the originality. It must be made by a human being. This is an indirect requirement of Berne Convention, and we are party of Berne Convention, so it's necessary to have a human being first, and second, the work must reflect the author's creativity. This is the condition of originality. It's the discriminative condition to access to protection. These principles will continue to apply, including to artificial intelligence. So now we must ensure that artists, authors who use artificial intelligence are not systematically disqualified, because it would be a very bad thing. So the personality, the creativity of an author who use AI as a tool or perhaps as a collaborator, like we said yesterday and today, the personality can be expressed, and it is essential to recognize this fact. Otherwise, artists and authors will be reluctant to use technology, and that's not a good thing. So we need to think. It's very important. We need to think about how this originality is expressed when artificial intelligence is used. And this is a major challenge. We have to distinguish creation assisted by artificial intelligence and creation generated by artificial intelligence. And we also have to think about the way to recognize the ownership of artists or authors who works with artificial intelligence. So then it's very important to think about that. And in France, it's a direction. It's a direction of the reflection. Then for creation generated by artificial intelligence, today, no copyright, okay. But tomorrow, we will also have to think about their status. We don't know. We don't know. Should they be protected or not? And if so, how? We don't know. But we think that the legislator, the European legislator, will be interested by the topic the next parliament. And finally, you know, human creation must be recognized for its irreducible singularity. And because it is necessary to recognize this singularity, it is imperative that transparency be imposed downstream. Artificial content, artificial production must be identified as such artificial production, and it's also a matter, you speak about this, it's a matter of misinformation, and it's a risk for democracy. And the Artificial Intelligence Act, which is the European regulation, European regulation, established this obligation of transparency on the output too.
Thank you. And it is really interesting to think about how your answer reflects back on the remarks we just heard about SAG, and also going forward to this discussion of disinformation, as you mentioned, really important connections there. I want to turn to the second major copyright question that I had suggested, which is to do with training on data. And I'll start again with you, Miriam. There are multiple US lawsuits right now for copyright infringement involving generative AI. And I'd love you to tell us a little bit about this, and in particular, how has the American legal doctrine of fair use become central in these cases, to the extent you can talk about it?
Of course. Well, and Amy understands that as the federal government, I have limited things to say on the record about private litigation, of course. But these are important issues, and obviously they've made their way into the courts, and that's the way the system's designed to work. These are the most contentious issues that are involved. And it's a subject of considerable controversy. There's well over 20 lawsuits in the US, some of which are class actions, so they have a huge impact. So I'll talk about what comes next in a little while, but I just want to preview that this study that we're conducting is, we're not waiting to roll out what our findings are until the very end. We're going to start rolling these out as they're ready. And so first we'll have digital replicas, because it's such a hot topic in Congress and it's coming up all over the place. Then we're going to, later in the summer, be putting out a copyrightability report and some other items. And then in the fall, this topic, this very thorny topic that includes fair use, if fair use doesn't apply, liability, where that liability sits, and what are the labeling and transparency requirements? That'll be coming out later this fall. So I'll just put a pin in that so that you know that these are issues we're looking at right now, and they're certainly being litigated right now, and there's going to be more to come there. So we are populating this report and this study with the information that we've gleaned from this notice of inquiry. And so I'm just going to dive in a little bit to what those questions really are. So we asked, does employing copyrighted materials to train generative AI systems constitute infringement? And if so, in what circumstances? And does it qualify as fair use under US law? So what is that? So the fair use analysis in the US is very complex. You have to weigh multiple factors in light of all the circumstances. There are several leading factors or precedents to apply. One of them is the Google Books case in the Second Circuit, and then Warhol v. Goldsmith in the Supreme Court last year. And something to consider is that copying for purposes of internal analysis has sometimes held to be fair in a number of cases, but at the same time, the impact on the actual and potential market for the copyrighted works can also be an important factor. So we've asked a couple follow-up questions. To the extent that consent or compensation is required, how could this feasibly be accomplished? Given the volume and variety of works involved, can it be done through direct licensing from copyright holders, some of which is already taking place now, of course, or through collective licensing, or would a new form of compulsory license be desirable? These applying if it is not fair use. And as a practical matter, how can copyright owners find out whether their works have been used in the machine learning? And what information about the process is retained by the developers? And what level of record keeping and transparency is appropriate or feasible? And if copyright owners are given the ability to either opt in or opt out of inclusion in these materials, how would that work, especially for individual creators? And then, who is liable? Who should be responsible? Is it the assembler of the material, the entity developing or offering the tool itself, or is it the user of the tool? And so for us, what we're thinking about is the ultimate goal is balance. We want to find a way forward that promotes rather than inhibits the exciting and valuable technology, while also ensuring that human creativity can continue to thrive. So this is obviously easier said than done. These are really, really complicated questions. And I'll just note before passing it on that we can't confine our attention to inside the US borders. The data is international, the products are distributed internationally, and everyone shares this goal of balance, and we're seeing some similarities and some differences. But we're asking in our study, should we adopt some approaches elsewhere or not? And of course, we continue to be in dialogue through our international affairs colleagues with other peers so that we can create something that's compatible, of course.
Thank you so much. And turning to you, Alexandra, if you could tell us about the state of legislation in Europe on these questions of training and restrictions on using copyrighted material to train generative AI models, and also what is the contribution of the European AI Act on this question?
So for the input, as we said, at the European level, we have the AI training is covered by the text and data mining exception. So in essence, text and data mining is an operation, is a technique for the automated analysis of content in order to extract information in form of patterns, trends, or correlation, only correlation. It's a deconstruction of the content. The text and data mining is a deconstruction of the content by using algorithmic processing to extract information. So we have two exceptions for text and data mining. They were in the directive of 2019, who was the directive said digital single market. Was copyright in the digital single market, and the first exception is not really a problem because the first exception is reserved for the academic sector, and so it is not widely contested. But the second exception is very contested. It was introduced by amendment. So it was not in the first version of the text, and it is opposed for several reasons. Firstly, because it was initially rejected. The scenario was initially rejected as possibly being too prejudicial for to the copyright and for the ownership of copyright. So it was rejected. It was not initially. It was not a good idea, but by amendment, it has been a good idea. So secondly, if the exception of text and data mining did not provoke a massive mobilization during the right holder at that time during the negotiation, but it is because in 2018 or in 2018 or 2019. Unless if you were reading in a crystal ball, nobody was completely aware that the development of generative AI had begun. It was like a secret. So we didn't mobilize against this exception. And the second exception of text and data mining is particularly broad in scope because it applies to all users, whatever the purpose, including commercial users. So it can benefit to all players. It is often referred as commercial text and data mining. It is, however, conditional to lawful access. So you have to lawful access to the content. And second condition, the absence of an opt-out or a right of opposition by the right holder. But this condition and the rebalancing seems very precarious in reality for several reasons, and the condition for implementing this exception are still being debated. To the points where the effectiveness of the law is in question. First, with regard with the lawful access, we don't know how to assure the lawful. What is the lawful access? And secondly, with the right of opposition, the right of opt-out, it must be machine readable. But how? What is machine readable? And how would be effective? Who is supposed to put these protection measures in place? And how can they be duplicated? Because the same content can be found online on multiple sites, and you don't know who is at the origin, at the source of the online. So it's very difficult to enforce this opt-out. So today we are very. It's very critical. It's a real problem. The text and data mining is a real problem, and the Commission, the European Commission, still is speaking about this exception with the right holders and with the providers of generative AI. And for the Artificial Intelligence Act, because cultural content is, is quality content. Yesterday we talked about GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, and cultural content are quality content, of course. So it is subject to a strong predation, and it is very difficult to oppose on an individual scale. So the Artificial Intelligence Act has attempted to redress more or less the balance somewhat by imposing an obligation on the suppliers of artificial intelligence, of foundation model, to put in place an internal policy to respect copyright. So this is the first obligation, an internal policy measures by design, more or less, to respect copyright and to respect, for example, the opt-out. First obligation. Second obligation, they have an obligation to be transparent on training sources. They have to reveal the sources that they used to train the model. So the text requires a sufficiently detailed summary. Don't tell me what is a sufficiently detailed summary. It's it's la langue de Molière. So we will see. And the discussion on this point was particularly heated. It was like, it was a scandal, this discussion. And its implementation should be ensured by a new authority in Europe called Artificial Intelligence Office, which should develop a template to resume the resume, if I can say.
I have so many questions for these two, and I would love to hear them talk about the similarities and differences between these approaches. One thing that's really notable is how much is undecided and how much they're really sorting out. But in the interest of time, what I think I'm going to do is open up for a couple of questions from the audience, and I do hope that maybe you have a moment to tell us just what to expect next as you're taking the questions from your offices, because both, or from your report. So, thank you.
Thank you. It's here. I understand that these laws were conceived at a time where, for example, you were governing French companies in France using French data, and likewise with the US. But I'm wondering, given that these AI companies are obviously using all data globally, and they are developing products that are globally, this has come up before with the social media companies, but even more so now, they are drawing on the whole of the internet without any regard to where it originated. How do you see any potential cooperation between the two of you, or how can you see your laws applying, given that they're so different?
We have a different law, but we have a similar solution in fact. And to respond, the AI Act, which establishes a framework, a regulation on artificial intelligence, has an extraterritorial vocation. So, like many texts applicable in the digital environment, all actors, all players, all suppliers of artificial intelligence who want to penetrate the European market will be subject to the Artificial Intelligence Act. So it's if you want to go in, you have to respect the European law. So everybody at the same level.
Thank you, and I'll just add that that's a reasonable concern, but it's not a new concern. So the reality is that both of our governments talk all the time. And on these sorts of issues related to intellectual property, the executive branch of the United States government, and with our support, engages on IP-related issues at the World IP Organization in Geneva, and there are many standing committees and a lot of ongoing work. So there is formal cooperation, but there's also, and capacity building and training like I did in my last job, but there's also just a lot of dialogue happening on an informal exchange of ideas as well, which is really important because we don't want to erect unnecessary barriers to cross-border commerce and communication and collaboration. And so there can be a lot of de facto harmonization through those efforts as well as through more formal ones.
Hey there. have a question. First of all, I love how we're getting into the weeds on all this. I manage a publication that covers the intersection of AI and media, and I just thrive on all the detail I'm getting here. So I have a question about the sequencing of maybe resolving some of these issues. So we spoke to the transparency question of copyright owners knowing whether or not their works were used in a particular training set. And it seems to me that before we resolve that issue, realistically, no LLM designer is going to reveal their training set unless the question of whether they had the right to ingest that content in the first place is resolved. So can you speak to sort of the sequencing of how these things need to be resolved in the real world or in law? And also, can you envision a world where that question of whether it was okay to ingest in the first place is resolved in such a way that it wasn't okay, and all LLMs today are deemed in violation of that principle?
It's a great question, nested question. Also, I'll reiterate that it is important to find solutions that don't inhibit exciting and important new technologies. And it is also important to recognize human creativity and the rule of law. And this is the case with a lot of different areas of law where you're balancing things. In terms of how the government will approach it, I can give you that sequence, but there is another sequence which is in the real world, like you said, what are the risk tolerances of these organizations doing the work? And that can be anything along the value chain from creations of models to creations of tools to use of those tools to create and distribute things, et cetera. So the I think top line answer is lawyers have a lot of work to do right now. There's a really good market for lawyers. For our work, which I'll speak to, and I'll just note that we're not the only ones in Washington working on these issues. Our plan is to roll out digital replicas and our recommendations in late spring. We're going to put out copyrightability, a little more guidance in our compendium of practices, which is what teaches, discloses to the public what examiners look at and what you need to know in order to protect something. And then we're going to get into those issues of transparency and fair use and labeling and liability. So stay tuned. I'll just mention really quickly that not only has Congress been very active in this area, as we talked about earlier, there have been 30 plus different pieces of legislation introduced. And last October, over on the executive side, the Biden administration issued an executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence. And on this issue specifically, it instructs the director of the Patent and Trademark Office, which is a different office, to consult with us after publication of this report and recommend potential executive actions that could be within their purview. The Federal Trade Commission is doing a call for public comment on proposed rulemaking around deepfakes, and the Election Commission is also doing some rulemaking in those areas. So there's a lot to sequence, and you're right. And I do encourage you to separate that between sort of what the government's doing about it as a larger issue, and also the decisions that all of you and all of your colleagues will have to make when diving into this world.
Thank you. Maybe one last question, then we'll break for the next panel. Thank you.
Actually, I have two small questions. Sorry about that. I will make it quick. So first of all, thank you so much for coming here and talking to us. I think this outreach from the policymakers is extremely important. So I personally believe that knowledge should be free, and also as an artist and a content creator, I think we should have the maximum creative freedom. But on the other hand, I also want to protect the artist as a community. So I want to know, like, what is what do you think will be the future position for the government to regulate the open source community? So that's my first question. And my second question is Yeah, real quick. My second question is, in the past, we artists had to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars to hire, for example, like models and makeup artists, and rent a venue to take some professional photos so that we can sell it on the stock photo website. But nowadays, like 60% of all the all the images on the stock photo stock footage websites are all flooded with really low effort artificial intelligence generated images. So since I heard that it's really almost like impossible to get the copyright for these images, so how can Adobe and all the other companies sell these images without copyright for a fee that just made everyone else's life so much harder? I believe that Adobe definitely has an army of lawyers to make sure that they can do this without getting into any troubles. But how do you see we as artists should evolve to adapt to this new age? Yeah, thank you.
So, for the first question about open source, it's a very important topic, and in the French report, we made a report. We were 15 experts: Yann Lequin, Luc Juliard, a former minister, to Cédric O, Arthur Mensch of Mistral. We were 15 experts, and we made a report for President Macron. And it was very consensual. We were in favor of open source for the artificial intelligence, to support the progress, to support the evolution of the technology. But open source of the system is not the same of it's not free for the artist or the author it's not the same thing, developing a model. If Meta or Google decide to develop a model open source, okay, but the benefit is indirect, you understand? So it's not a reason to say that the artistic content are free. No, it's not. And this is in the Artificial Intelligence Act. We note that even if the model is open source, the provider, the supplier, the provider of the model have to respect copyright and have to put in place the policy to respect copyright and have to reveal the source of training.
And okay. Second question was, what about AI garbage competition? Who wants to cover that?
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, these are very good questions. And one thing that we find ourselves talking about with the public when we conduct public outreach, when we talk to artists, when we work with important groups like the Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts to help artists make their way through this crazy world that you're all living in, is, like, what is the value of your work, and what do you want to sign up for? What contracts do you want to sign? What are the terms of those contracts? Anything open source or public domain or on the internet, there's a lot of confusion around what exactly all those concepts are. And it was an important issue when the internet started, and it's an important issue now, that's a source of both content and also distribution, of course. One just point of clarity is that a lot of models like that, open source kinds of models or distribution or non-commercial kinds of distribution models, still governed by copyright. It's just that the terms and conditions allow for more free distribution, but they're still usually bound by whatever the original terms were. And so you could just find yourself, again, just buried under a pile of paperwork that only a lawyer can save you from. And, they're good questions. And so when you are thinking about why is this the case and how is this fair, all's fair in love and war and art, I guess. And it's important to really look at, really think about your work, where you want to put it, how you want to make it, and what that means. So,
I think that's a beautiful place to end. Please join me in thanking our extraordinary panelists, Alexandra and Miriam.
Thank you so much to the three of you for this great take on copyright. Thank you. I now call our final panelist on disinformation and propaganda. So please join us on the floor. Asma Mhalla from École Polytechnique and Columbia University, Alexis Cruz, AI and election specialist, James Katz from Boston University, and this will be moderated by Raphaël Bourgois, editorial director of Villa Albertine.
Thank you, Vincent, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight at Villa Albertine for this very last conversation about disinformation and propaganda in the age of AI. This talk, as I just mentioned, is the last of 8, a series that started yesterday, exploring creation in the age of AI, a theme that has brought us deeply into exploring the matter of truth and representation for text, images, and archives. For the next 40 minutes or so, we will slightly shift our focus, still discussing trust, information, and data, but as elements crucial to the production of and the diffusion of news. As we discussed yesterday, truth and representations are important questions for art, but they are also fundamental, obviously, for shaping our news landscape. The first thing that must be acknowledged is that when we talk about news and tech, the players' balance of power has changed lately, with the big tech facing states, and in the middle, us, the public. Today's discussion is also important because it explores the intersection of AI, politics, and media, areas that are profoundly affect and our understanding of reality and the role that big tech companies are playing in a year of multiple elections, as you know, in the US, obviously, but also in Europe. The question is even more crucial to us. So joining us tonight, as Vincent just mentioned, Asma Mhalla, who is coming from France, so thank you for that. You are a political scientist teaching at Columbia University and Polytechnique.
Paris.
In Paris, obviously. And your work focuses in particular on new forms of power between states and technological giants. James Katz is with us tonight too. You're a Felt Professor of Emerging Media Studies at Boston University, and your current research examines the mixing of mobile communication technology and artificial intelligence and what this will mean for society. So you will enlighten us on the future, I guess, I hope. And last but not least, Alexis Cruz. You are an impact designer and strategist at the intersection of technology and geopolitics, and you formerly worked for Mhalla. And during the 2020 US election, you coordinated a team to develop strategies against global electoral interferences. So you'll help us understand what we can do against these interferences. So we'll focus mainly tonight on 3 topics: how AI is reshaping truth and information, the current scale of AI-driven disinformation, because I think that's important since disinformation has always existed, but what is AI bringing to this subject? And we'll try to address some of the regulatory challenge we are facing in the US and in Europe. So let's dive into it right now. And we wanted to start maybe with a short presentation by each of you of the main topics you were addressing on this question of AI and information and disinformation. And maybe starting with you, James, because I guess you have this kind of historical perspective on what we are facing, and maybe it's good to start with a little bit of history, and I'm a historian myself, so I always think it's a good idea.
Thank you very much, Raphaël. So first of all, I would also like to thank our organizers for creating such a splendid pair of events. I'd also like to salute the audience for your interest in these topics and for your being here on such a beautiful evening, resisting the temptations of spring in New York. Technology's always been used to create fake information, art, and has always challenged the producers of prior forms of art. As you might imagine, think of how the painters felt in 1840 when the daguerreotype predecessor to the camera came along. And yet, think of how much art is being produced today with the camera, without the camera, just a true abundance of art. So I think we have to not only pay attention to the negatives, but also to the positives and the potentials. And on that note, the daguerreotype was invented in 1837. 1840 was the first documented fake news when a suicide was purported to have occurred in Paris, which was done by an artist who wanted attention by his friends. And of course, in the succeeding years in the Italian Civil War, all kinds of fake scenes were created and photographed and then put in newspapers to try and stimulate antipathy from one side against the other. So these problems, as I say, are not at all new. And in fact, I also like to say that the easy problems have already been solved. That leaves us with the hard ones. And among the hard ones are discerning what's fake news and what is not fake news. And this is because governments themselves legitimately claim to produce news which itself is fake, a long-standing practice. So also political perspectives often determine what people think is fake and what is not fake. So I would like to just highlight what I think are three big problems: deep fakes, the extreme personalization of messaging during political campaigns that is possible through AI. So for example, we heard earlier about fake voices reproduced. It could be that people could receive messages from relatives saying, vote this way, I really want you to vote this way. And it's not at all from their relative, it's one of those fakely created entities. And third of all is the economics of deep fakes and other type of fakery, which is now very profitable and also very cheap to produce. There was a nice Wall Street Journal article about a week ago about somebody who spent $109 on a bot system to create a fake newspaper that sold those ads along the side and started making good money with an investment producing fake news pulled from here and there on the internet. So let me just close by saying two major points. One is that AI can also help defend against these things. It can be equally clever in detecting and protecting. And also, as we heard, it can be a way for us to represent our agency so we can participate in debates and dialogues, not ourselves, but our artificial entities. And so I think finally, we have to be aware, of course, the ethical presentations. As Linda Powell pointed out, there's a lot of bias in these systems, but I think the bias can go the other way, and these are biases of the material that we put into it, and that can be altered and eliminated. So I'm very hopeful.
Thank you, James, for starting with some optimism. We needed that after, as I said, a series of 8 discussions that were not so optimistic at the end. Alexis, maybe you can jump in, because you've worked on these questions of how to use AI or how to fight AIs when it comes to the matter of an election, for instance. So maybe you can enlighten us on that.
Sure, and I'm not an optimist, I'm a realist, and so thank you for making this a little bit of a optimistic conversation. So I was one of the people who ran the US 2020 war room for Mhalla, and at that point in time, things like labeling, misinformation around COVID, misinformation around voting, everything changed, the landscape changed because everything was done online because people cannot participate in the democratic process in person, right? Currently, I do consulting with another big tech company, which will go unnamed, on election trends. So focusing on every single election that's taking place, including the one that's upcoming in the EU, and trying to understand what are the gaps, what are we not thinking about, and how are we working with stakeholders, and how are we thinking about disinformation campaigns. And I'm going to just say something that sounds really awful, but yeah, there's a lot of disinformation campaigns, and there's a lot of interest from China and Russia and Iran. But with the erosion of trust in democracy and institutions, they really don't have to do that much work. And I say that because if anyone here has OpenAI, right, the app that's on their phone, they have access to 3.5 and 4, and you type in a question about when is the French election, right? They will not give you the correct date. And I know this because I tested this about 4 hours ago. And I asked, okay, that's great. Thank you for giving me a general overview of like when the voting period is, but like when is the actual voting date for France? And they gave me some information about Croatia. So what I'm saying is it's like the information that they're pulling from, the data sets that they're pulling from, it's actually incorrect. And so you don't have to look that hard to find incorrect information. And so for the micro-targeting, which is being deployed right now in the India elections and being deployed right now by PM Modi's own campaign, they're using WhatsApp to deploy that and micro-target people. In Pakistan, they did the same thing. Imran Khan's party also used types of micro-targeting, but AI video to show that he was giving this big speech while he was behind bars. And so governments are using this type of technology, and we are kind of in a place where we already don't trust what the news outlets are telling us. We already don't read newspapers. We already are not questioning what's happening around us. And so it just makes it that much easier for misinformation and propaganda to spread. And so there's been so much talk about AI, but it's really the social media companies that are amplifying this information, right? And if there was a mechanism to remove all misinformation, let's say it was generated by OpenAI, and it ended up on WhatsApp, and then it ended up on Instagram and TikTok, and so on and so forth. If someone flagged that that was misinformation and it all came down at once, we would be in a much better place. None of the regulations within the US, within the EU, in Brazil, in India, in China, they don't account for this. And so AI companies are left up to their own devices, and they are in a position to create their own governance mechanisms that aren't all necessarily congruent. And my team created the Meta Oversight Board. And so I know what governance can look like within a company. I also understand the good that multilateral organizations are trying to do, but you have to look at why certain companies are focused on certain elections and putting money behind certain things. a lot of companies got rid of their trust and safety teams and are not focusing on elections. So as many pieces of legislation are up and coming across the US, and as many different pieces of regulation are being passed, companies are not making their trust and safety teams bigger, right? So how are they supposed to be able to enforce these new pieces of regulation? So more of like a realist, not optimist. But I'm not necessarily worried about generative AI. I'm worried about autonomous intelligence. And whatever we do today will put the guardrails in place for autonomous intelligence. But I think generative AI is like the new shiny thing on the block. And social media is the distributor that we should be worried about.
Thank you, Alexis. We'll come back to a lot of what you've said, especially the distinction between misinformation, disinformation, etc. And what James just said, that it was sometimes or often labeled with a political perspective. Is there such thing as truth when the social media is called truth? Is well known and run by former President Donald Trump. Asma, Mhalla, maybe since you're working on this question of big tech and states, and Alexis just introduced a question and this distinction between what was brought to us by social medias and what's happening right now with AI. I mean, if I understood you correctly, it's much worse what's happened with social media, and maybe we should still be focusing on that and not so much on what's happening with AI. What's your take on that?
I completely agree with what Alexis just said, but there's a kind of continuum actually between Gen AI and social media and the misuse actually of these two tools, and actually they're completely complementary in their misuse. But the focus of my work is more on big tech and tech giants, as you know, a political and geopolitical new hybrid object or product actually, and actors, entities, new entities. And they are bringing three big disruptions, if I can resume it and phrase it this way. The first disruption is, Alexis, you just said it, micro-targeting, and micro-targeting, when it comes to political elections, political agenda, when you put it between, opinion leader, populist opinion leaders, for example, here in the US, but also in France, we have, the far right leaders super using, super easily these new techniques. It can be very dangerous. First, micro-targeting, because it's just destroying the links, interpersonal links between people, what we call common project, the desire of having a common project altogether, and actually it is polarizing opinions. First. Second disruption, let's say, it's the double use technology. It is civil and military in the same time, and you have a weapon in your pocket called smartphone. And I just read an article some weeks ago about it's a new small trend in the US called dumb phone. Going back to dumb phones, the little small Nokia phone, just to call people, and that's it, that's all. And yeah, we have this weaponized and weaponization of social media as, new weapon in what we call informational warfare, and even now cognitive warfare. So it is the second big disruption. And the third and last one is, the appearance of these tech giants as hybrid actors, of this new geopolitical landscape. And what is super interesting to see and to understand is the new value chain of producing information. And press, media are becoming not just, this fourth counterpower. No, they are just becoming content provider of, these tech giants, OpenAI, Meta, Elon Musk and Grok, yeah? And when we just focus on, for example, the political project or even ideological project of Musk about, X, it's pretty clear. We had some leaks in January, I think, about a meeting he had, a kind of small internal meeting. And he was saying to the team present that day that one of the goals he had, for X was to just destroy press and media and to rebuild and to find this, to build X like a new public sphere of direct democracy from people directly, to the info, and vice versa, actually. So with this political plan just to destroy the press in his kind of libertarian, pretty hypocrite, let's say, plan, because in the same time, one of the major clients of SpaceX and Starlink is, the federal government. We have these three big disruptions, and what we also witness is this new cooperation or deals between, the press and OpenAI, for example, except New York Times. The New York Times. But in France, for example, Le Monde has signed, a collaboration with OpenAI, and the deal is, I don't know if the deal is fair. It seems to me that it could be on the long term pretty unfair, but the idea was to provide to OpenAI all the articles, just to train the algorithm, to give that data, fresh data, and in exchange, OpenAI will put more visibility to the Le Monde articles, for example, through links. And the stake here is data. You said, we have a lot of data sets, that after the training becomes misinformation because info can be not reliable or accurate. But the stake here is precisely here just to make cooperations with the press to get, super valuable data to train the algorithm and to have the right output after that. So yeah, we have a super challenging times with this new information value chain.
Challenging time, but are they changing so much, as you were saying, James? Maybe I want to ask you three, if we have something less theoretical and more specific that we know about AI-generated misinformation or disinformation, do we have any idea of the scale of this AI-driven disinformation compared to other source of disinformation we can meet? I don't know if it's something we know, but maybe James, you have something you can share about that.
Well, I think one of the things people don't recognize about Google and its Gemini program, that where does it get the data? Well, it gets the data from Google Books. It gets the data from all your inquiries. Every time you ask something of Google, it uses that. There's something called a library of unpublished books. And so people often take advantage of this. If they write a book and nobody wants to publish it, it will be put in the library of unpublished books. And it draws on all those as well. It draws on software codes. So it's quite remarkable that all the different uses of Google provide data from which it develops its algorithms. And in terms of ChatGPT 3.5, that's performing on the LSAT, the law school test, at about 98% or so. It can pass the standard admission test for law school at a very high level. On the other hand, it does very poorly on English comprehension, for example, even 3.5. So I think it's important to realize that there's a huge amount of information, and it will produce inaccurate results quite commonly because it's what is out there. And it doesn't know what is misinformation, disinformation. It's all information as far as these training algorithms are. At the same time, if I can, go back to something that Linda Powell said about not being able to create images of black doctors treating white children. They also they'll write insulting poems about many people, but they won't write insulting poems about Chairman Xi of China. Now, why would it not do that? It's because there are these guardrails internal to these systems that try to avoid sensitive topics and avoid embarrassing mistakes. And when you try to avoid some of those, you actually create new ones. But I think my colleagues, especially Alexis, could comment on the huge flow of disinformation coming out of China, Iran, Russia. And once again, the ways of producing it are so simple and so easy that it's strange that we aren't actually seeing more of it than we do. Almost like they don't care, and we're ruining ourselves without their help.
Alexis?
That's a tall order. But no, I'll talk about the regulatory landscape and why you're not finding any poems about certain world leaders, right? And so for these companies to be able to operate within certain countries, they come to agreements. And at Meta, I was on a team called the Global Operations Team, where we worked with every regulatory agency. They would send us legal takedown request, and depending on how valid the request was, we would remove the information, but only after consultation with a number of different partners internally. If you remember, I believe it was earlier this year, leading up to Davos, Sam Altman was on this global tour, meeting with different prime ministers, trying to make sure that their products were used in different markets. And
Sam Altman from OpenAI.
From OpenAI.
For those who don't know,
yes,
who doesn't
from
know.
OpenAI. And one of the reasons why he's doing that, and you're not hearing about Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, doing that, is because they already have these relationships. When you're the new kid on the block, you're going around but part of, and I'm just assuming here, but part of those conversations is making sure that they are protecting their markets and access to their markets and data. And so there was a discrepancy with some information related to PM Modi, and that was a really big firestorm a few weeks ago. So I would pay attention to what countries do they have protections in and what countries do they not. And this is not only OpenAI, this is also Anthropic, for instance. And if you use Anthropic's system, you're going to get outdated information because they don't train on information from the data from the internet. So you're getting information from 2023. So you're either getting censored information, or you're getting outdated information, or you're getting information or you're getting responses from prompts where, I'm sorry, I'm a large language model, I can't answer this, which is a very conservative policy coming from Google. Whereas at 3.5 and 4, they'll give you a ton of information with citations, and half of those citations come from Wikipedia, which I don't know about you, but as an academic, that is not an authoritative source. So part of it is market and making sure they still have access to the market, and part of it is also conservative or super liberal policies that make it possible for them to provide you with certain responses without talking about Iran.
That's very interesting because I experienced this myself when you ask question on sensitive topics such as, I don't know, the war between Israel and Hamas right now to Google, to Grammarly, for instance. They will tell you, I cannot answer this question, but OpenAI will give you an answer.
Right, and so a company's policies are either to not step in the mud, so they do not want to be They do not want to come under any microscope, or they want the public to be able to come to their own opinion. I think Google's approach is very conservative, and when it redirects you to Google search, what do you end up with? And then OpenAI is you either need to be a very curious person and understand where the sources are coming from, or figure out what the actual question you are trying to achieve with.
Yeah, as you were saying, OpenAI is trying to have you make your own mind, but Elon Musk, for instance, Asma, Mhalla will tell you that OpenAI is actually driving you to a woke, as he would put it, a woke perspective on the world.
Yeah, there's this super weird new cultural battle, around, AI. Is it woke or anti-woke, new tool? And in the Silicon Valley, you have this part of the elite, tech elite, becoming more and more closer of the alt-right and what we call now the anti-woke capital. So yeah, there's this new, battle of values and vision, of the future and of the world, actually. But what is, I just wanted to add a point because we haven't highlighted it. It's about, misinformation and disinformation. What deepfakes and even, the audio fakes, which are very easier to produce and to deceive people, is, this it's going to be harder and harder just to distinguish what is real and what is fake, what is artificial, actually. It's not just about, fake news. It's not just about manipulating, an existing information. You can just produce it from scratch. And it's going to be, a new symbiotic world where, maybe virtual and real, fake and real are becoming completely, let's say, interdependent or codependent. And yeah, regulation can be an answer, but cannot be the only answer, because we're gonna super quickly see the limits of the tax, And in Europe, we have this tendency to just, regulate top down, and you just cannot tackle this super complex new issues just, by text and by the law. And we need a new cognitive hygiene, actually. How you inform yourself, what are the sources, why, who is talking to you, from what point of view, for which agenda. And it's very important to re-educate people. And in Canada, for example, we have this. During the COVID, they developed, a great campaign just to educate people in the streets and just to say, okay, people, we are not going to tell you what you have to believe and what you're going to believe or not. We cannot. But please just take some seconds when you are exposed to a content just to ask yourself what I am exposed to, and just before engaging any action like, share, follow, just ask yourself, what is this content? What it is? Who is producing it? Why am I exposed to this content? And yeah, just few seconds, and you have, you know, this great book of Daniel Kahneman called, you know, S1, S2, System 1, System 2, and yeah, it's so useful to read it because you just need few seconds, 5 seconds, just to switch from your System 1 biases, reflex, to System 2, you know, a more distant, let's say, approach to information. And yeah, we really need to re-educate people to this new cognitive reflexes.
Thank you, Asma. Actually, Chad Nelson, who was here yesterday working for OpenAI, was making the same remark about about our relationship with images, how we have to be educated and critical to all the images we have in face of us. So obviously, we will have, I'm sure, I have a lot more questions to ask you, but we want to have time for the public to ask you some questions. So we'll jump into this right now. So if you want to talk, we have someone here, someone there, Camille or Vincent. Oh, sorry. And okay. Oh, where's it going?
Yeah, Can I start?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much. This has been really fascinating talk. I have a follow-up question on the fake images that given that we reach at the point that we cannot discern some images, whether it's real or original or fake, given that we are constantly losing the discernibility, I'm curious to hear your insight, especially James, as you generously walking us through the history of the technology and how the fake news has been discerned, successfully, luckily so far up until today. But camera was possible because still we were able to discern to a certain degree because we were able to find some visual evidences. But today, after hearing about the OpenAI's amazing development of their technology, I'm actually losing hope. How can we discern what's real and what's made?
First of all, I want to emphasize that we've been exposed to fake news for generations. So what do we hear? We hear press releases, we see photographs, and all of that is decided by an editor and produced artificially. There was a lot of concern when Barack Obama was first running for president in the United States that some of the photographs of him showed him to be darker complected than other photographs, and which of those photographs would be published and exposed to the public became a controversial issue. So, as I say, we've been seeing decisions that affect what is real and what isn't. But going forward, if I may say, there are some cryptographic techniques that through public key cryptography and other techniques can be used to verify that this is truly from the source that is alleged to be the source. And as we become more sophisticated consumers and have a greater support system behind it, that I think will be a problem that goes away. Just as for any of you who lived before the World Wide Web, who tried using a computer to engage in watching videos or anything, very difficult. But with that, now even a child can do it. And so I expect a similar kind of thing to go forward. But I would really like to comment about your comment about Musk and so on. On the other hand, he did a great service of showing how the government put pressure on social media companies to screen information. So even though he's done some bad things, he's also done some very good things. But that's why, coming back to your question, I'm an optimist, because just as we solved the problem of having to use Unix code on the internet and now have WYSIWYG, similar things will take place. Thanks for the question.
I'll just jump in and say right now it's watermarking, and watermarking is not foolproof. It's actually something that, let's just call it like V1 for people to be able to show whether or not something was created by AI. There are a lot of people focused on encryption, which is going to be a little bit harder to remove. If you're a bad actor, you will figure out a way to work around any of these systems. So as much as we talk about transparency, I think it's a little bit of a push and pull, but right now it's watermarking, and then there are amazing AI tools that actually identify whether or not something was created by AI. But anything can be doctored. And so between watermarks, between little pop-ups from whatever websites that say this was created by AI or X, Y, and Z, that's what we have to work with right now. But I have a feeling by the end of this year, by the time the election cycle's over, we might have some new and exciting ways to show the difference between what's real and what's fake in terms of images.
What about industrial scale public key cryptography?
I've heard about it. It's interesting.
I agree.
I have no microphone, so I'll use my voice. You have a question.
Right. Hi. Is it working? Yeah. Okay. So I have a question for probably James and possibly also Alexis. Actually, James, yesterday I was here and a representative from Google was here, and I mentioned to her about, well, using Google Books, that it's such a large database of information. Could it be used to remove bias from, results of generative AI? And she pretty much wasn't able to give an answer on that. But leading to what Alexis said about Wikipedia, about being, not such a reliable source. If I wanted to see Franklin Roosevelt's birthday, yeah, maybe I would trust it. But if I want to know about something he did in his lifetime, I might get a wrong answer. So leading from that, here comes my question. If Wikipedia, which is somewhat curated and definitely collaborative, where people can contribute to the reliability and accuracy of what's there. If we look at that as a benchmark, can generative AI be as good as that if it's not curated and collaborative? And can it only be good as that, as Wikipedia, or could it somehow be better?
Great question. So first of all, Wikipedia itself is highly contested. Does anybody know, short of the most recent Palestinian-Israeli conflict, what the most contested entry is in Wikipedia? JFK assassination? Close. Adolf Hitler. There are people who are always fighting to improve Hitler's image on Wikipedia. So, and then they are fighting back, the editors fight back, and so on. So, so that, I think, tells you something about Wikipedia as a gold standard for how we understand the world, because I would think there are many nooks and crannies of Wikipedia which have been taken over by fans of whoever, whatever cause it is, and is totally distorted. However, recall that these large language models are only models drawing on what is available. There's no sort of larger God overseeing it, what is correct and what isn't correct. So, to answer your question most directly, as long as they focus only on Wikipedia, they'll be as good as Wikipedia. But once they get new things, it's a large question as to how reliable those new things are. I'll just say one more thing quickly, which is that the brilliance of these is the normal speech patterns that they reproduce, and secondly, the logic, the internal logic of what they produce, which is generally far superior to that of a human. And I suppose the larger question for the Screen Actors Guild is, what if they're able to produce actors who are better and audiences that are better than real actors and real audiences, are we going to be denied them? I'm assuming as long as the base character gets compensated, it'll be okay.
We're not going to start a conversation on that, if you don't mind, because we're out of time. So thank you very much to you three. We can have a round of applause.
Thank you so much. I think this wraps it. Thank you to the four of you. And before we break out to the next room and enjoy the cocktail and artworks by Mine Atairu and artist Pierre Zandrovic, I want to again thank you deeply, all the speakers of those 2 days. We were honored to have your presence. Thanks to all people making this event possible, our partner SSCD, all Villa Albertine team. Thank you, Raphaël, Glenn, Paul, and special thanks to Camille for putting this great lineup. Thank you very much.
Very interesting. It's still a thing.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.